I guess first off I would like to thank the people of Cumberland for entrusting me with this role once more. And I think it's exciting times. I believe we have been given a mandate by the so-called silent majority to move forward. However, I think we've also been given a message. And while most of us think we have been paying very serious attention to environment, social issues, maintaining the small community lifestyle, I think the message we've got is let's really stress that. Let's make sure we don't drop that ball. And we don't plan to. So I think it's a new beginning, if you will, of bringing people together, that those who are on one end of the scale that would have no development and those that would let us log, burn, pave. We need to find this middle ground where we can, in fact, accommodate the needs of the village, have development sufficient that we can repair our infrastructure. And there's certainly no one developer going to come along that's going to pay for all our infrastructure needs. But we get the beginnings going where we can start building a community. And my vision is that in 10 to 20 years, Cumberland will be a thriving, bustling little community. Still, at triple our size, would be a little community, a little village, and we can have that village lifestyle. But we would have an exciting downtown core that would have some neat shops that are starting to show up now, as you know, and still have the vibrancy and the tax base, the commercial tax base in new residents. And I appreciate one of the strongest points of concern has been the amount of residents, but in order to have that commercial base we need, you have to have people to shop. And that's one of the issues the council and the developers, etc., are trying to deal with. So when we put that in context of the whole region, Comox Valley, I'm also pleased with the face, or the look, if you will, of the new regional board. The potential for increased cooperation, which has always been my word. I'd like to see us have an increase in cooperation, and let's talk about the A word, the amalgamation. I don't think that's even needs to be a subject at this point. That'll come up when the public decides they have too many politicians, when we're all working together. And that's fine. But I'm pretty excited to see that Greg Phelps and Paul Ives have been elected in Comox and Courtenay, and that they want to, as their first priority, start working together with their neighbors. I think that's a great step. We have to look at Comox Valley as having been discovered in the world. And to use one of your comments about global concerns, I fully agree. We have to think globally. And to do so, we have to think, at least regionally, to start with, that in order to react to the global situations, whether we're talking about population explosions, economy implosions, or the general impact on us, there will be an impact on Canada. There will be an impact on Comox Valley. And Comox Valley has been discovered in the world, as we all know. And that there's not a decreased demand in these times for people that want to move here. There's just less ability to do so because they can't get the financing for people to buy their homes where they're coming from, in Alberta, etc. When that economy improves, like we know it will again, I expect that rush to start all over. We need to be prepared for that. And I'm hoping this new council, and I welcome them all, those coming back and the new councillor, they need to really work together to see how they're going to meet this challenge. Where do we compromise on multifamily versus large lots with single home, family homes? We need to meet the needs of reducing the imprint, the footprint that each of us puts on the planet. We need to deal with affordable housing to the best of our ability. And I appreciate that's quite a buzzword with hardly any meaning anymore. I don't know that there is such a thing in Comox Valley as affordable housing to someone who has no income. There isn't. So we need to deal with that, and I like to use like emergency shelter. How do we deal with subsidized housing for people who can't afford homes? All these challenges, combined with us needing to repair our infrastructure, are going to create enough work for this council without any extraneous inviting that we don't need. So I think it's a challenge. I think it's a positive one. I'm very optimistic that at the end of 3 years, this council will leave the community better than they found it. And that's really their goal.
Just to return to the notion of thinking globally, I'm very aware of the collapsing global economy. Seems imminent that there will be dramatic changes and that will impact us locally. Can you say anything more about that? Any preparations that are in place?
Well, I'm not a global economist, of course, but it will impact us, obviously, as the job losses move down the line. And it has impacted us when we see the pulp mill in Campbell River and the lumber mills being impacted. Employees from this area come from there. The positive thing we can say is that Canada is probably the best positioned country of the G20 to weather this storm. And it doesn't mean we're going to do well in it, but we'll weather it better than the rest. And in Canada, BC and Alberta are the strongest provinces to weather the storm again. And the other advantage we have is sitting on the Pacific Rim, that gateway. The Asian, China, India investments, etc., will support the economy of British Columbia. It gives us a little more diversity, that we're not totally dependent on the southern U.S. impact. Weathering the storm, though, that will still be negative, just not as negative as others, will create some belt tightening throughout. We'll have to take slower steps. There's no question it will impact the developers wanting to come to Cumberland, that what might have been seen as a 7-year build-out of a large project might take 10 or 15. They're not going to start a huge residential or commercial development without A, being able to get the financial backing, which is becoming more difficult, as you know, and B, being able to sell the product to an affluent society when they get it built. So it will have an impact. It'll slow us down. But if we get to those first stages, we've at least made a preparatory start to being able to put something into our infrastructure to have a brighter future and move forward. I don't see any other way, frankly. If somebody had alternatives rather than just say no, we'd certainly be all ears. I've heard people say, well, there must be other ways to get money for our infrastructure. That's just, tell me those other ways, because we've searched and we don't know of any. The idea that we could depend on people to donate money for pipes, it would, I don't know how many years it would take to get a public fund raising effort to come up with anywhere near half of our needs would take, but it would be beyond realism. We would be deteriorating faster than we could raise that kind of money.
So what is the state of the infrastructure? We hear that it's bad, but how bad?
Well, the engineers tell us to fix the roads, the pipes, the buildings, the total infrastructure of the community would take $48 million. The public works crew brought a pipe as an example, because they've been telling us, you know, we're fixing leaks constantly. And when I approached them at one point, 6 or 8 months ago, to say, what would happen if we made a policy to say, instead of putting a patch on that pipe, replace that pipe, that length of pipe. This would be wonderful if you had the money to start with, because it does cost more. In the long run, it's much cheaper, obviously, but you have to have the money at the beginning to be able to make that investment. They brought in a chunk of pipe about 3 feet long that had 4 patches on it. It had started out to be a 3 or 4 inch pipe, I forget exactly. but it was reduced to half that size by the corrosion on the inside. That was pipe in our ground today working, and that was just a little piece of it. So it gives a pretty good indication. We've advised the fire department not to be very quick with slamming on and off with valves, because you could burst pipes. And it's probably worth touching on, because I know with that in mind, people have said, so why would you spend money on water meters when you could just fix pipes? The reality is, water meters will A, help find where the leaks are, B, reduce the use. And anybody in Canada recognizes that we are abusers of water. We do not have an endless supply of water for this new growth that's going on in the world. We hear that Canada has 25% of the world's fresh water supply, but in reality, the numbers I hear from the UN are we have 6% of the world's available water supply. It's okay to say you have all this water, but you're not going to run your lakes and rivers dry to provide it. So we don't have an endless supply of water in this country. And to be global, again, to come back to that, we have to demonstrate that we can, in fact, reduce our intake and our consumption and get some better habits for all our resources. The only way we can do that is with meters. The investment in the meters, which are a little over $700,000 for Cumberland, which would be offset by an already approved $400,000 provincial grant, would allow us to reduce the need to increase capacity to meet our demands by more than that amount. So it's a good investment, frankly. Every community I've talked to at UBCM, Kamloops, Kelowna, Dawson Creek, and of course Royston, our neighbors, as you know, North Vancouver, have never regretted going to meters.
And UCBM is?
The Union of British Columbia Municipalities, where we meet annually to discuss municipal issues. I'm a great believer that at UBCM and FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, is where we show strength when we deal with the senior governments. FCM, you know, when we spend, I think, approximately $3,000 to attend FCM in a year, it's a bit of money, it's a bit of work, but at the end of the day, it got things like the gas tax return, because they could show numbers of mayors from across this country telling the federal government we need more of our share. I want to pursue that further to say we should be getting more than 8% of the total tax base that comes from our communities, which is another topic again. But
right. But on that note, what that brings up for me is Cumberland historically seems it's realistic to see it as a jewel in the crown of the British Empire, and historically for Canada, it's been a very, very significant locality. Is there any chance for historical grants or anything that could help us with our infrastructure? Has that been explored?
Every possibility is being explored. I wouldn't say that every grant possibility has been explored, because we simply don't have the staff to spend the time to do that. And we come right back to the same issue as we did with the pipes. Would it be worthwhile to hire a grant specialist? Yes. And very, very good chance that that grant specialist would earn 10 times their salary. But you need the money to hire them in the first place. We need to hire an additional superintendent of public works. We need to have staff in the front office because we're having trouble keeping up. One of the problems, and this does come back to this tax sharing issue. Municipalities are where the tax revenue for the whole country is generated. Municipalities are where industry, development, commerce happen. And yet, when a developer comes to town, the municipalities put out money for planning departments and resources in order to make it happen. And they don't see returns until there's buildings on the ground and zoning has happened, so they can wait 2 or 3 years for those returns. As soon as there's approval and exchanges take place, the province and the federal coffers receive benefits. And they receive jobs, which is income tax immediately while they're building these buildings. Nothing comes back to the municipality until buildings are complete, assessments are done, which sometimes that takes a year. And I feel, and I'm not alone, I'm sure, that a greater portion of that created tax needs to stay in the community, rather than have us go back to the province and the feds for handout seeking a grant or assistance to work on this infrastructure, which was money that came from here in the first place. And it seems to me there would be less administrative costs overall if it just stayed here. So, how successful we'll be, as you know, it's hard to turn old tradition around that quickly, but it can happen. And I think at FCM is where that can happen.
And again, FCM is what?
The Federation of Canadian Municipalities. It'll be held in Whistler next year. And it's a pretty powerful body.
Is there any way citizens can, through direct action, assist that endeavor?
You know, I believe if citizens communicate with their MPs and MLAs and say, what about this? This is a concern. We need to have some of this tax money stay in the community where it's originated, where it's generated, and where it's spent. Don't matter how far the money goes around in a circle. It starts here, it ends up here. All the federal and provincial tax money ends up getting spent, if it's not on highways, it's in municipalities. So why do we send it around in that circle to begin with? All of it, at least. I fully appreciate we all need to put money into equalization across the country. We are a federation, and I absolutely support that. If we're doing well and another community isn't, then we should help pay for them. That's part of our system. But I don't think it takes 92% of all the taxes generated to do that. You know, we send so much to Ottawa and then come back with transfer payments for health. Well, health is spent in the province. Why didn't it just stay here? How much money did we spend moving that money back and forth? It seems like a pretty simple issue to deal with, in my view. I'm sure it's not as simple as I see it, but it's certainly worth a review.
So a citizen should approach our local MP.
I think so. Talk to our MP and our MLA, because the province does the same thing, and put pressure on to say, deal with this, answer this question. Why do we need to send 92% of the income tax, or taxes in general rather, that are generated in a municipality in our area, back to the province and feds to do what they do with and cycle it back out to us in smaller portions? Whatever the standard smaller proportion is, why don't they just leave it here? The transfer payments we get annually from the province in Cumberland's is about $230,000. Why do you take it away and then send it back automatic? It seems to me there's less administrative costs if you just leave it here in the first place. Those kind of things, that's all.
That brings up the notion of local currency. Do you know, has Cumberland ever had its own local currency?
No, not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know how successful a program like that would be here. I don't have a lot of experience with it.
Right. I know that's one of the things being considered by the Transition Town initiative out of the UK. A lot of the smaller villages are developing their own currency to do exactly that, keep the money in the community and circulating. And I think Salt Spring was one of the first places in the world, in the contemporary world, to initiate that. And I think, as far as I know, it's been fairly successful. So that may be a strategy for us here in the village.
I open my mind to any new ideas. I detest the idea of saying, "No, let's not hear about something that I'm not familiar with, or I fear because of ignorance." Tell me about it. I'm always interested. The same way I felt when they talked about amalgamation in the valley and doing a study is, do the study. Tell us the goods and the bads before I have to make a decision. I don't think it's the time. I don't think it's the time for the discussion. But anytime someone wants to get information and bring it forward, I'm all ears.
Sounds like a good spot to end this interview. I'm very positive, and
Well, thank you for the opportunity to do
I
it.
appreciate your giving the time.